So, panagdait everyone. So, I am Christy Hanaquin Villasma. So, our topic for today is cultural geography. So, first, let us define what is cultural geography or what is cultural geography. So, cultural geography is the study of relationship between culture and place. So, in broad terms, cultural geography examines the cultural values, practice, and materials, expressions, and artifacts of people, the cultural diversity, and the plurality of society, and how culture are distributed over place, and how place and identities are produced, and how people make sense of place and build sense of place. So, and how people produce and communicate knowledge and meaning. So, cultural geography has long been a core component of disciplines of geography, through how it has been conceived, and conceptual tools and approach to empirical research have changed quite markedly over time. So in our module, we have such question like since such difference exists, cultural geography exists, and one branch of cultural geography addresses a whole range of why and what and how questions. Why, since humankind is a single species, are cultures so varied? So what are the most pronounced ways in which culture and cultural religions are distinguished? What were the origins of the different cultural religion we now observe? So this will be answered during our discussion. So there are components of culture. So culture, we all know that culture is transmitted within a society in succeeding generation by imitations, instructions, and it is learned, not biological, and has nothing to do with instinct or genes. So we all know that culture is we learn, and it is not about genes or etc. So as a member of a social group, individuals acquires integrated sets of behaviors, patterns, environmental and social perceptions, and knowledge of existing technology. Although one of necessity learns the culture in which one is born and reared, one not indeed cannot learn totally. So from age, sex, status, or occupation may detect the aspect of culture whole in which one becomes fully. So a culture that is, despite overall generalized and identified characteristics and even outward appearance of uniformity and conformity, display a social structure, a framework of rules, interrelationships of individuals as established groups. So each individual learns and addresses the rules and convection not only a culture as whole, but importantly, all of those specific to the subgroups to which he or she belongs. So we all know that we have many subgroups. For example, here in Dominag, we have subgroups. We have Subanen, we have Bisaya, and Muslim. So my subgroups belong to Bisaya. So, and it is torn, such subgroup itself may be recognized social structure. So, culture is a complex interlocked waves of behaviors and attitudes. So, we all know a cultural complexity is a pattern of activities, beliefs, rites, and tradition associated with one central features of life and particular culture. For example, ceremonies, folklore, and songs. So, for example, distinctive eating of utensils, the use of gestures, or the ritual, religion, ceremony may summarize and characterize a culture for casual observers. So those are, however, individual, insignificant parts of much complex structure can be appreciated only when the whole is experienced. So out of the richness of human life, we seek to isolate for special study those more fundamental culture variables that give structure and spatial order to society. So we begin with culture traits, the smallest distinct items of culture. We have that the knowledge and etc. Culture traits are units of learns behavior, ranging from the language we spoken to the tools used or games or played. So a trait may be an object like a fish hook, for example. Sa technology, waving of fish net, sa beliefs, we have in the spirits who live in water bodies, and also we have our attitude that a convection of fish is superior to the other animal protein. So such traits are the most elementary expression of culture, the building blocks of a complex behavioral patterns of distinctive groups of people. So individual culture traits that are functionally interrelated compromise a culture complex. The existence of such complex and universal, like keeping cattle, was culture trait of Masai of Kenya and Tanzania. Related traits including the measurement of people wealth by name of cattle owned, so a that containing the milk and the blood of cattle. So Masai For Maasai, cows or cattle cows are their wealth. They have their tradition. Cows are very important for them, such as kanang families and clans establish alliance through the exchanging of cattle, like consuming the meat and milk of cows, considering a sacred act, one that binds them under creator. So also Maasai, ang cows mora ilabitaw kanabitaw, it is play important role kay mo ilahang kanang source of income. So, and also mo na kinadagan panglitan daghan kay kakao, so meaning ikaw ang pinakadato or ikaw ang dato sa ilaha. So, culture traits and complex have vital extent. So, when they are plot and maps, the religion character and components, its related geographical interest and vital distribution of these individual elements, but usually concerned with cultural religion. So, portions of the Earth's surface occupied by people sharing and distinctive culture characteristics and summarize their collective attributes for activity. Example include the political organization, society diverse, their religion, their form of economy, and even their cloth, eating utensils, or housing. There are as many such cultural religion as there are separated cultural traits, complex, and populations groups. So, culture limbs are sense cultural religion at the broadcast scales of generalization. So first we have the interaction of people and environment. So culture develops in physical environment that in this way contributes to difference among people. In primitive societies and equations of food, shelter, clothing, all parts of culture depends on utilization of natural resources at hand. So interrelations of people with environment of given area, their perceptions of utilizations of it, so and their impact on it are consistent of interwoven themes of geography. There are special concern of geography exploring cultural ecology, the study of relationship between culture and groups and their natural and it occupies us. So let's proceed to the subsystems of culture. So, understanding a culture is perhaps impossible for one who is not part of it. So, understanding culture is perhaps impossible for one who is not part of it. For example, moto ka sa ubang lugar and you don't know kung sa ilang culture, so dili ka kasabot nga nung ingon ana sila. But when you stay or you live there, so makasabot na ka ay mo din ingon ani sila kay mo din ilang culture. So for analytical purpose, however, the traits and complex of culture, its building blocks and impression may be grouped and examined a subset of a whole. So Lilith White suggested that a culture could be viewed as a three-part structural composed of subsystems that are termed technological, sociological, and ideological. So, in a similar classification, biologist Julian Huxley identified three components of culture. So, the artifacts, social facts, and metafacts. So, let's go on to the technological system. So, it is composed of material objects and techniques of their use by means of which people is able to live, such as objects are the tools and other equipments that enable us to feed, the cloth, house, defend, transport, and use ourselves. So, technological system, it is where kanang used by people which people able to live. For example, the tools like instruments, atong pagkaon, cloth, house, the transportation, and amused ourselves. So the sociological system of a culture is some of those expected, accepted patterns of interpersonal relations that find their outlet in economic, political, military, religion, kinship, and other associated. So dira sa sociological pattern, dira na bilang ang atuang economic, political, military, religious, and kinship, and other associated. So we also have the ideological subsystem, consists of ideas, beliefs, and knowledge of a culture and ways in which they are expressed in speech or other forms of communication. So ideological system nadira consisting of ideas, beliefs, knowledge of culture and the ways in which they are expressed in speech or other forms of communication. So nasa ideological. So, balik ko na ko, ang technological subsystem na it composed of material object and the techniques of their use by means of people, like food, shelter, clothes, transportation, and other. And for the sociological subsystem, we have the sum of those expectations and accepted patterns like economic, military, religious, kinships, etc. And for the ideological, it consists of the ideas na to, beliefs na to, and the knowledge of culture and the ways in which they are expressed in speech. So, technological subsystem is the adaptive strategy used by different culture in making a living. So, katuganing house, food. So, in a broad sense, they addresses technological system at the disposal of this culture and the instrument tools people use to feed, clothe, house, defend, and amuse. So, it is called actually material objects we use to fill these needs artifacts. So, for most human history, people lived by hunting, gathering, taking of nature, and the only minimal dependence of implements and controlled use of fire. So, but we must remember that technological development, it is a dynamic concept. It is most useful and accurate to think of these countries of the world as arrayed along every changing continuum of technological subsystem. So, sociological system, continuum, and change also characterize the religion, political, formal, and informal educations and institution, and compromise sociological system culture together. These social facts define the social organizations of culture. They regulate how the individual functions related to the group, whether it be family, church, or state. We have the third class, katong ideological subsystem of elements defining identity of culture, comprise the ideological system. The subsystem consists of ideas, belief, knowledge, ways we express through things in our speech or forms communications. So, often we know or think that what the beliefs of a group are forms of written sources. So, we know nga, usay ka ng laws na to, it is part na siya sa ideological system. Sometimes, however, we must depend on actions and objectives of a group to tell you what is true ideas and values. Because we believe action speaks louder than words, and do as I say, not as I do. So, our commonplace recognitions of the fact that actions and words do not always coincide. So, usay ang storya, dili jud mo coincide sa action. Usay. But the values of the group cannot be deduced from written record alone. So, let's move on to culture change. So, the recruiting theme of cultural geography is change. No culture has been categorized by permanent, fixed, and set materials, object systems, organization, or even ideologies. Although all of this has been long enduring within society at equilibrium with its resources based on total isolated from an change, such as isolated and stagnation, have been rare on the whole, while culture are essentially conserved their constantly changing. So we all know that culture is constantly changing, and it's not kanang bitang walay permanent sa culture kay maskin kanang material objects, kanang systems of organizations or ideologies mausab siya. For example, sa material objects, we Pinoy, we are very kanang bitang into social media nga what is trend mo wala tong buhaton. And also we have our systems of organization nga magkausab because culture change, and we also have the ideologies or atong mga beliefs nga magkausab. For example, sa unang moingon nga bawal ani bawal ana, but then today generation moingon nga tinumuhan o buktot and something like that, or etc. So culture is changing. When culture is changing, we should adapt kay kanang culture change man. And we all know nga ang the world is revolving, so it would change fast and fast. So karon lahi na po nga generation, we sunod na po ang culture mausap or mapunan. But then katong sa una madala ra man siya punto siya pero mapunan, and naay mga uban na mausap. So let's proceed to innovation and diffusion. So innovation implies change to a culture that result from adoption of new ideas. So mani akong ingon nga it is the result of adoption of new ideas because of the high-tech na kay ang technology. Those created within the social group itself or those originally elsewhere. improvement in material technology, such as bow or arrow of jet engine. It may involve the development of non-material forms of structure, social structure, and interaction. For example, feudalism, for example, or Christianity. So, primitive and traditional societies characteristically are not innovative. So, in societies at equilibrium which their environment and no unmet needs, change has no adapted value and has no reason to occur. Indeed, all societies have initiated resistance to change about youthful fads or glorification of times past or familiar change in points. So, however, when a social group is inappropriate or unresponsive mentally, physiologically, or economically to change circumstances and innovation, it is said to exhibit culture lag. So, tungod ato na cultural lag na mahitabo. In the term culture, heart, it used to describe these restricted areas of innovation from which key culture elements diffuse to exert influence of surrounding religions. The health may be viewed as a cradle of a culture groups which develop systems of livelihood of life, created distinctive cultural landscape. All heart areas develop the trappings of civilizations, which are usually assumed to include writing or the forms of record keeping. So, along distance trade connection, astronomy and mathematics, social stratification and labor specialization, formalized governmental system and a structured urban society. So, let's proceed to acculturation. Acculturation is the process by which one group undergoes a major modification by adopting many characteristics of another, usually dominant culture group. In practice, acculturation may involve changing in the origin culture patterns for either both of two groups involves a prolonged first-hand contact. So, for example, acculturation adopting many characteristics of another. For example, we're in Dominag, so we have Sabanan, Muslim, and Bisaya. If ang nakauna is Bisaya, then moanhi ang Muslim, so kanang murag mag-adjust, nga na naman ang Sabanan, so murag mag-adjust, and kanabitang kanang mag-involve sila changing kanang ang Bisaya ang sabot sa Muslim, ang Muslim ang sabot sa Bisaya, and so on sa Sabanan. So it involves kanang prolonged first-hand contact. So such contacts and subsequent cultural alteration may occur in conquered or colonized religions. So very often, the subordinate of subject population is not forced to acculate or thus so voluntary or overwhelmed by the superiority in numbers or the technical level of conquer. So, adapting culture do not usually accept interact items originally formed of outside. Diffuse ideas and artifacts commonly undergo some alteration of meaning or form that makes them acceptable of viewing group. So, process of fusions of old and new called syncretism is a major feature of culture change. It can be seen in alterations of religion, rituals, dogma made by convert societies seeking acceptable conformity between old and new beliefs. So the mix of Catholic rite and the Voodooism in Haiti is an example. So one of a familiar syncretism is reflected in subtle or alteration of imported cousins to make the comfort of the demands of American fast food. So, let's proceed to cultural diversity. I think this is the last na akong i-discuss. So, language, religion, ethnicity, mate, or criteria and are among the most prominent and culture traits of societies and religion. So, language, religion are basic components of culture. We all know that language and religion is the very basic components of culture and helping to identify who and what we are as individuals and clearly placing us within larger communities of persons with similar characteristics. In our earlier terminology, there are multifaceted components of ideological systems of culture that help shapes the belief of systems of society and transmitted to its succeeding generations. So ethnicity is a cultural summary rather than a single trait. It is based on the firm understanding by members of a group that they are in some fundamental ways different from others who do not share their distinguished composite characteristic, which may include language, religion, natural origin, unique customs, or other identifiers like language and religion. Ethnicity has vital identification like them too. It may be served as the element of diversity and division within cultural complex society and state. So we begin our discussion with culture with its subsystem of technological, sociological, and ideological content. So we have learned the distinctive makeups of subsystem and combinations and interaction of traits, complex characteristics of particular culture is subjected to. So a product of change or innovations, vital diffusion, adoptions, and accumulation, those process of cultural development and alternation have not however lead to a homogenized world culture even after thousands of years. Cultures, content, and exchange since the origin of agriculture. It is true, as we early observed, that in an increasing integrated world, access to material toppings and technologies of modern lives and economy in wider available to all peoples and societies. As a result, important culture commonalities have developed. So nevertheless, all of our experience and observation indicates a world still divided, not unified in culture. Our concern as geographers, it is to identify the traits of culture that both have vital expressions and indicate significant differences from other culture complex. So we must reject our superficial and meaningless generation derived by types of foods people eat for breakfast, for example, or the kinds of eating implements they do. So that's all. So let's proceed to my partner, Mr. Diaz, for the continuation of this report.
At this juncture, we'll continue discussing all about cultural geography. To be more specific, we'll be discussing another component of culture, which is language. To begin with, we can describe language as an attribute common to all of us because language is common to all of us. It represents our identity whether in a national level or in a cultural level. We have different languages that represents ourselves. By textbook definition, language is defined simply as an organized system by which people communicate with each other using mutual comprehension. Also, it is an important medium by which culture is transmitted. In addition, language is said to determine the attitudes, understanding, and behaviors of the language users. Therefore, language may be both a cause of symbol of cultural differentiation. If that conclusion is true, one aspect of cultural diversity may easily be more than 5,000 languages spoken by many thousands of cultural groups here on Earth. Therefore, language is a hallmark of cultural diversity. Language differ greatly in their relative importance. If importance can be taken to mean the number of people using them, more than half of the world's inhabitants are speakers of so-called thousands of tongues. The diversity of languages is simplified when we recognize them as related families. To elaborate, a language family is a group of languages believed to have evolved from an earlier tongue. For example, Indo-European family is among the most far-reaching of the language families of Europe, a large part of Asia, and the indigenous languages of the Americas. To elaborate, I have here pictures that depicts what the Indo-European family is. As you can see, there have different languages starting from the 3500 BC up until the 700 AD. And if you can see the green line there, at the end of it is the modern English, and by following the line, we can trace back how English evolved or developed through time. So it started from the Germanic up until and it developed into Western Germanic, into the Low German, the Anglo-Saxon, and until the creation of the modern English. By comparing similar words in Indo-European language family, linguists deduce that these languages derive from an ancestor tongue called Proto-Indo-European. which was spoken by people living in Eastern Europe about 5,000 years ago. Their society apparently fragmented, the homeland was left, and segments of the parent culture migrated in different directions. So at this point, we can also already see the geographic part of this discussion. So because of the transfer of one society or one group from another place through migration, language was spread and was able to evolve. For example, the modern English that we have discussed earlier. At this point, we'll be discussing about language spread and change. Language spread as a geographical event represents the movement of people or through time in areas where the language is spoken. For example, another example of this is that the Bantu languages found in the Bantu line in sub-Saharan Africa. So I have here another picture which depicts the migration or the transfer of the Bantu line from Africa here. As you can see, there are various movements in the sub-Saharan Africa or the Bantu line during this time. So this caused 500 Bantu languages, which is a variant of the Proto-Bantu, carried by expanding, culturally advanced population who displaced linguistically different pre-existing population. Another example of language spread and change that is more recent are the languages of the European colonists. During the time of the European colony, the languages of European colonies similarly replaced native tongues in their areas of settlement in North and South America, Australia, and Siberia. That is, languages may spread because their speakers occupy new territory. So, however, Latin people replaced earlier Celtic languages in Western Europe not by force but by gradual abandonment of their former languages by native populations brought under the influence and control of the Roman Empire. Language spread can occur through either integration or isolation, which can lead to the emergence of separate and mutually incomprehensible languages. As a result, the parent proto-language no longer remains unitary. In addition, gradual changes in word meaning, pronunciation, vocabulary, and syntax occur naturally within a single language and often go unnoticed, but can lead to significant language change over time. In fact, these changes can result in the creation of essentially new language in the course of centuries. For example, the English of the 17th century Shakespearean writings or the King James Bible sounds stilted to our ears. Language evolution may be gradual and cumulative, with each generation deviating in small degrees from the previous patterns and vocabulary of its parents. Within 400 years, the changing English language has developed from a localized language of islanders off the European coast to become the native tongue of over 400 million speakers and the official language of more than 40 countries. So at this point, we'll be now discussing the standard and variant language. People who speak a common language, such as English, are members of a speech community, but membership does not necessarily imply linguistic uniformity. A speech community usually possesses a standard language comprising the accepted community norms of syntax, vocabulary, pronunciation, and a number of more or less distinctive dialects. For example, just like how no two individuals speak exactly the same, most speech communities have distinct speech variants called dialects. Differences in vocabulary, pronunciation, rhythm, and rate of speech can set group of speakers apart from one another. Here in the Philippines, we can differentiate the Tagalog spoken by a person living in Luzon to the Tagalog spoken by a person living in Mindanao because of their pronunciation, rhythm, and rate of speech. We can differentiate them because of variant language, because that is the standard of variant language. In many places, social dialects denote real class and educational levels, with those of higher status and educational achievement most likely to use the Northern Standard language, while the less educated or the lower status individuals are more apt to use the vernacular or non-standard language or dialect adopted by the social group. For example, here in the Philippines again, we can identify those of higher social class because of the way they speak. They are fluent and they speak English in a fluent manner, while those of a lower class, just like ourselves, we speak the vernacular or the Bisaya. Storya tag Bisaya or Motay mas common sa tuwa because we are not fluent or we are not apt in using using straight English in the matter. So going back, more commonly, we think of dialects in spatial terms. Speech is a geographic variable. Each locale is likely to have its own, perhaps slight, language differences from other places. For example, here in Pagadian, our Bisaya here is like straightforward Bisaya. But when we go to Cebu, their Bisaya are different. Or for example, when we go to Cagayan City, the Cagayan de Oro, their Bisaya is different also. There is a slight difference in our language. That is because of geographic variable. Each local has different language of its own, whether in a slight differences or in the accent or in the pronunciation. Each of us have different that don't have exactly the same pronunciation um, or perhaps rhythm in the way we speak our language. Such differences in vocabulary, word meanings, and other language characteristics help define the linguistic geography, which is the study of the character and spatial pattern of geographic or regional dialects of a general speech community. Language is rarely a barrier in communication between different peoples. Bilingualism or multilingualism can enable skilled linguists to communicate in a common third language. For example, I speak Tagalog, Bisaya, and I can communicate with other people outside our country through English because I know how to speak English. I can understand them at a certain level, and that is why language is not a barrier in communication. Long-term contact between people with different languages may require the creation of a new language called pidgin, a simplified amalgamation of languages usually based on one dominant language such as English or French, with elements borrowed from other languages. In its original form, a pidgin language is not the first language of any of its speakers. It is a second language used for communication. For example, here in the Philippines, English is our pidgin because English is our second language. We use it to communicate with other countries, with other people from other countries in order to have a connection with them. In addition, pidgins are characterized by highly simplified grammatical structure and sharply reduced vocabulary adequate to express basic ideas but not complex concepts. So pidgins are simple but understandable. They are not too complicated, but they are more expressive. If a pidgin becomes the first language of a group of speakers who may have lost their former native tongue through disuse, a Creole has evolved. So Creoles invariably acquire a more complex and grammatical structure and enhanced vocabulary. Now we'll now discuss another aspect of language, which is the lingua franca. A lingua franca is an established language used habitually for communication by people whose native tongues are mutually incomprehensible. So here in the Philippines, our lingua franca is Filipino because, as I've said earlier, here in the Philippines we have different dialects. And if we don't have a lingua franca, meaning we can't exactly communicate with others straightforwardly. That's why we need the lingua franca, which is a Filipino, in order for us to have a common language we can use to communicate with each other. Because Philippines have different islands, right? And because of that, there are various languages, different dialects that are present here in the Philippines. But because of lingua franca, we have established a language we can use for communication because our native tongues are mutually incomprehensible. So at this point, we'll be discussing language and culture. Basically, language is the cultural complex of a region, reflecting environment, technology, and social customs. Arabic has 80 words related to camels, an animal on which a regional culture relied for transport and labor, and the Japanese contains over 20 words of various types of rice, whereas the Russian is rich in terms of ice and snow, indicative of the prevailing climates of his linguistic cradle. So a common language fosters unity among people. That's right. It promotes a feeling of belonging to a region. If it is spoken throughout a country, it fosters nationalism. For this reason, languages often gain political significance and serve as a focus of opposition to what is perceived as a foreign domination. For example, during the times of the Spanish colonization, so we use our voices or we use our language for us to be heard by them. We didn't want them to occupy our nation. We use our language, we use our we use our dialects, we use whatever language we have back then in order to fight off the Spanish colonizers, because they are foreign domination, and we don't want that in our country, because language fosters nationalism. So at this point, we'll be discussing the last two terms of language and culture, which are the toponyms and the toponymy. So start with toponyms. So toponyms are also called places names. They are languages on the land, the record of the past and present cultures. Names endure as reminders of their passing and their existence. So one example of toponym here in the Philippines is the Quezon Avenue. So as we know, it is named by a former president, Manuel Quezon. So they use his name as a toponym in order to endure his existence here in the Philippines, for his contributions, for his dedication to serve our country. Toponymy, on the other hand, is the study of the places names, the study of toponyms. Therefore, it is a revealing tool of historical cultural geography, for place names are part of the cultural landscape that remains long after the name givers have passed from the scene. So, in England, for example, place names ending in Chester, such as Winchester and Manchester, evolved from Latin castra, meaning camp. In the New World, on the other hand, not one, but many languages were used to name landscape features and new settlements. In doing so, settlers remembered their homes and homelands, honored their monarchs and heroes, borrowed and mispronounced words from rivals, adapted and distorted Amerindian names, fables, and recalled the Bible. So that's it for language, one of the components of culture. At this point, we'll now be transitioning from language to religion, the next component of language, or rather the next component of culture that we'll be discussing in this video. So let's continue our discussion about cultural geography. So at this point, we'll be discussing another component of culture, which is religion. By definition, religion are cultural innovations. They may be unique to a single cultural group, closely related to faiths professed in nearby areas, or derived from or identical to belief systems spatially far removed. Although interconnections and derivations among religions can frequently be discerned, as Christianity and Islam can trace descent from Judaism. And we have also this distinction between monotheism, the belief in one God, and polytheism, the belief in more than one God. But these terms are not, or this distinction among religions are not actually spatially relevant. It is more useful for the spatial interest of geographers to categorize religions as universalizing, ethnic, and tribal. To continue, Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism are the major world universalizing religions that claim applicability to all humans and that seek to transmit their beliefs to all lands through missionary work and conversion. Membership in universalizing religions is open to anyone who chooses to make some sort of symbolic commitment, such as baptism in Christianity. No one is excluded because of their nationality, ethnicity, or previous religious beliefs. Ethnic religions, on the other hand, have a strong territorial and cultural group identification. One becomes a member of an ethnic religion by birth or by adoption of a complex lifestyle and cultural identity, not by a simple declaration of faith. These religions do not usually proselytize, and their members from distinctive close communities identified with a particular ethnic group, region, or political union. Ethnic religions, for example, are Judaism, Indian, Hinduism, or Japanese Shinto. These religions are an integral element of a specific culture. To be part of the religion is to be immersed in the totality of the culture. Lastly, tribal religions are special form of ethnic religions, distinguished by their small size, their unique identity with localized culture, not yet fully absorbed into modern society, and their close ties to nature. Animism is the name given to their belief that life exists in all objects, from rocks and trees to lakes and mountains, or that such objects that are abode of the dead, of spirits, and of gods. While shamanism is a form of tribal religion that involves community acceptance of a shaman who through powers can intercede with an interpretation of the spirit world. So now, we will be discussing the principal religions. Each of the major religions has its own unique mix of cultural values and expressions. Each has had its own pattern of innovation and spatial diffusion, and each has its own impact upon the cultural landscape. Together, they contribute importantly to the worldwide pattern of human diversity. We may logically begin a review of world faiths with Judaism, whose belief in a single God laid the foundation for both Christianity and Islam. Unlike its universalizing offspring, Judaism is closely identified with a single ethnic group and with a complex restrictive set of beliefs and laws. It emerged some 3,000 to 4,000 years ago in the Near East, one of the ancient cultural hearth of regions. Christianity, on the other hand, had its origin in the life and teachings of Jesus. The covenant he preached was not a rejection of the traditional Judaism, but a promise of salvation to all humankind, not just chosen people. In addition, Christianity evolved quickly into a universal religion of salvation and spread quickly among the underclass of the eastern and western parts of the Roman Empire. In 313 AD, the Emperor Constantine made Christianity the state religion. Much later, the faith was brought to the New World with European settlements. After the fall of Rome, Christianity divided the western and eastern branches. The Western Church, based in Rome, was a stabilizing force during the Dark Ages, while the Eastern Church, based in Constantinople, expanded into Eastern Europe, Russia, and Near East. The fall of the Eastern Empire to the Turks in the 15th century briefly opened Eastern Europe to Islam, but the Eastern Church remains a major component of Christianity. The Protestant Reformation split the Church in the West, with Roman Catholicism remaining dominant in Southern Europe and various Protestant denominations and national churches emerging in Western and Northern Europe. This split influenced the global spread of Christianity, with Catholicism being brought to Latin America, the Philippines, like our country, India, and Africa, being brought to Anglo-America, Australia, New Zealand, Oceania, as well as South Africa. Now, let's now head to Islam. So, Islam is a religion that shares many beliefs with Christianity, including the belief in one God, who communicates with humans through prophets. The Prophet Muhammad is highly respected as he completed the work of earlier prophets such as Moses, David, and Jesus. The Quran, the holy book of Islam, contains not only religious teachings but also instructions on how to conduct daily life. The 5 pillars are the foundation of Islamic practice and unite believers in a brotherhood that transcends racial, color, and caste distinctions. The founding of the Islamic community by the Prophet Muhammad began in the Medina in 622 AD and marked the beginning of the Islamic lunar calendar. The mosque is the central Islamic communal life and the main representation of the religion on the cultural landscape. Its main purpose is to accommodate the Friday communal service mandatory for all male Muslims. The mosque is often the most impressive structure in the town, with perfectly proportioned domes, towers, and minarets, as well as intricate parapets and cupolas. On the other hand, Hinduism is the world's most oldest religion, dating back over 4,000 years, with no specific founding event or initial prophet. It is a complex web of religious, philosophical, social, and economic and artistic elements that are integral to Indian civilization. It has an estimated 600 million followers, mostly in India, where it constitutes 75% of the population. Hinduism accepts all forms of belief and emphasizes the divinity of the soul and reincarnation. One's position in life is determined by karma, and the social caste into which one is born is an indication of their spiritual status. The goal is to move up the hierarchy and achieve salvation and eternal peace through union with the universal soul, the Brahman. The last principal religion is Buddhism. Buddhism was founded by Siddhartha Gautama in the 6th century BC in northern India. It is the largest and most influential dissident movement in the world. The Buddha's teaching were a moral philosophy that explained human suffering and viewed the road to enlightenment and salvation through understanding the Four Noble Truths. The Buddha instructed his followers to carry his message as missionaries of a doctrine open to all castes, promising ultimate enlightenment and salvation, which raised Buddhism from philosophy to a universalizing religion. The belief system spread throughout India, where it was made the state religion in the 3 AD century BC. It was carried elsewhere into Asia by missionaries, monks, and merchants. While expanding abroad, Buddhism began to decline at home as early as the 4th century, slowly but irreversibly reabsorbed into a revived Hinduism. By 8th century, its dominance in northern India was broken by conversions to Islam, and by the 15th century, it had essentially disappeared from all of the subcontinent. At this point, let's now proceed to the East Asian ethnic religions. Buddhism encountered and merged with pre-existing ethical belief systems when it spread to China and Japan. In China, Buddhism blended with Confucianism and Taoism, while in Japan, it amalgamated with Shinto, a polytheistic animism and shamanism. Chinese belief systems such as Confucianism focuses on achieving the best possible way of life in the present existence and are more ethical and philosophical than purely religious. Confucianism emphasized the importance of proper conduct between the ruler and other subject within families. There are no churches or clergy in Confucianism, but the belief in a naturalistic heaven and ancestor worship are encouraged. Buddhism teaches that eternal happiness lies in the total identification with nature, while Confucianism emphasizes the proper conduct between family members and between ruler and subjects. Buddhism, with its emphasis on achieving nirvana in this life, was easily accepted as a companion to the traditional Chinese beliefs. Buddhism also influenced and joined with Japanese Shinto, a religion based on nature and ancestral worship. Shinto is primarily a set of customs and rituals rather than an ethical or moral system. At first resisted, Buddhism was later accepted and combined with traditional Shinto, and Buddhist deities were seen as Japanese gods in different form. Buddhist priests also took control of most of the Shinto shrines in which the gods are believed to dwell through ceremonial torii. So at this point, let us now proceed to ethnicity. Any discussion of cultural diversity would be incomplete without mention of ethnicity. Based on the root words ethnos, meaning people or nation, the term is usually used to refer to the ancestry of a particular people who have in common distinguishing characteristics associated with their heritage. Ethnic groups may strive to preserve their cultural heritage through the collective retention of language, religion, festivals, cuisines, traditions, and in-group relationships. Also, in ethnicity, we have this term called ethnocentrism. So, ethnocentrism is the feeling that one's own ethnic group is superior. This ethnocentrism is often fostered and supported by these preserved relationships and associations of ethnicity. Normally, reference to ethnic communities is recognition of their minority status within a country or a region dominated by a different majority cultural group. For example, we do not identify Koreans living in Korea as an ethnic group because theirs is a dominant culture in their own land. Koreans living in Japan, however, constitute a distinct and segregated group in that foreign country. Ethnicity, therefore, is an evidence of areal cultural diversity and a reminder that cultural regions are rarely homogeneous in the characteristics displayed by all of their occupants. The increasing movement of people around the world has made ethnicity less about indigenous populations and more about outsiders in an alien culture. Immigrants and refugees have two choices: assimilate by giving their past cultural traits or retain their distinctive heritage. They often settle among their own ethnic group for refuge and learning, but eventually they may leave and join the general population. So at this juncture, let us now proceed to the last component of culture and the last topic of this discussion, which is other aspects of diversity. Culture is the sum total way of life of a society. It is misleading to isolate, as we have done, only a few elements of the technological, sociological, and ideological subsystems and imply that they are identifying characteristics differentiating culture groups. Economic development levels, language, religion, ethnicity are all common distinguishing cultural traits, but they tell only a partial story. Other suggestive, though less pervasive, basic elements exist. We can view other aspects of diversity through architectural designs. Also in music, food, and games. Music, food, and games and other evidences of the joys of life too are cultural indicators associated with particularly world or national areas. So let's now proceed to cultural traits. Culture is not just a set of individual traits, but rather a unique, complex combination of traits that create a unique identity for each culture. These cultural traits have a spatial expression that divides the Earth's space into regions. While some cultural traits may be shared between different cultures, each culture has its own distinct set of traits that sets it apart from neighboring cultures. If two or more culture complexes have a number of such traits in common, a culture system may be categorized as a larger spatial reality and generalization. In cultural geography, culture religions In cultural geography, culture regions and complexes are parts of the hierarchy that can be combined to form composite world religions or cultural realms. These realms attempt to identify groups of culture systems with distinct characteristics that set them apart from other realms. They help to document the perceptions of world-scale cultural contrast. The current database is not enough to definitely categorize cultures globally. However, based on fundamental differentiating characteristics such as development level, language, religion, and ethnicity, preliminary recognition of the composite cultural realms can be attempted. These are regionally discrete areas that are more than similar internally to other These are regionally discrete areas that are more than similar internally than to other realms. So here is a picture that depicts the cultural traits of the world. That's it for the discussion of cultural geography. Thank you for listening up to this point.